The observation deck of the Terran Space Academy buzzed with excitement. Hundreds of third-year cadets gathered, their blue uniforms creating a sea of nervous energy. Through the massive viewport, Earth hung like a blue jewel against the blackness of space. Admiral Park stood at the podium, his weathered face serious under the stark lighting. He cleared his throat and the room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've been selected for something unprecedented," he began, his deep voice carrying across the room without needing amplification. "For the first time in our history, human cadets will participate in joint military exercises with the Galaxian Legion." Whispers erupted across the room. The Galaxians were legendary warriors, 8-foot-tall insectoid beings with exoskeletons that could withstand small arms fire. Their military had been the backbone of Galactic Confederation peacekeeping for over 3 centuries. "This is not just a training mission," Admiral Park continued, silencing the whispers with a raised hand. "This is humanity's chance to prove we belong at the table. The Confederation is watching." Commander Kim Ji-woo stepped forward, her uniform crisp despite the 16-hour shift she'd just completed. At 32, she was remarkably young for her position, but her tactical brilliance during the Proxima incident had fast-tracked her career. "You've all studied Galaxian battle formations in theory," she said, her voice calm but intense. "Now you'll face them in practice. They've agreed to this exercise as a diplomatic courtesy, but make no mistake, they expect to wipe the floor with you." In the third row, Lee Min-ho shifted uncomfortably. He was tall for 19 with quick eyes that missed nothing. His instructors called him a natural strategist. His classmates called him overthinking. Right now he was thinking this sounded like a recipe for humiliation. He raised his hand and Commander Kim nodded at him. "Commander, with respect, what exactly are we supposed to learn from getting absolutely crushed?" he asked. A ripple of nervous laughter spread through the cadets. Commander Kim's expression softened slightly, the corner of her mouth twitching upward. "Who said anything about getting crushed, Cadet Lee?" 3 days later, the transport ships descended toward Nexus 7, a moon specifically terraformed for military exercises. Its varied landscapes provided every possible combat environment, from dense forests to urban ruins to harsh deserts. Lee looked out the viewport as they approached, watching the terrain grow from toy-sized to life-sized. In the seat beside him, Choi Yoonju was reviewing battle plans on her tablet. "They've won their last 47 training exercises against other Confederation forces," she muttered, scrolling through data. "Their coordination is perfect." "Perfect might be a weakness," Lee replied, though he wasn't sure he believed it. The ship shuddered as it entered the moon's atmosphere. Around them, 80 other cadets checked equipment or sat in silence. Some prayed, others tried to look confident, and failed. Meanwhile, on the other side of Nexus 7, Warlord Tae-hyun inspected his legion. 800 Galaxian soldiers stood in formation, their exoskeletons gleaming in the artificial sunlight. Their compound eyes reflected the light like thousands of rubies. "These humans are barely out of their planetary cradle," Tae said, mandibles clicking in what his species considered laughter. "The Confederation ministers have strange notions about including them in our military councils." His second-in-command, battle leader Kang Do-yun, stepped forward. Unlike Tai, Kang had actually studied human military history. "We should not underestimate them, Warlord," he said cautiously. "Their adaptability is remarkable." Tae's mandibles clicked again, this time in dismissal. "Adaptability is the resort of those without proper planning. Our battle meld makes 50 minds function as one. What can untested cadets do against such perfection?" Kang said nothing more, but made a small gesture of respect before walking away to prepare the troops. Unlike his commander, he sensed something unpredictable about these exercises. Back at the human landing zone, Commander Kim gathered her cadets. Equipment was being unloaded as she spoke. "The Galaxians have agreed to a 3-week exercise. We'll begin with standard combat scenarios and progress to more complex simulations. All weapons are non-lethal training models, but they'll hurt enough to teach you to avoid them." She paced before them, her eyes taking in each face. "The Galaxians communicate telepathically in battle through what they call the battle meld. It gives them perfect coordination. You'll need to think differently to have any chance." A cadet raised her hand. "How are we supposed to counter telepathy?" Kim smiled. That's what you're here to figure out. That night, as the cadets set up their base camp in the forest sector, Lee couldn't sleep. He walked to the edge of the perimeter, looking up at the stars. Somewhere up there, the Confederation Council was waiting to see if humans were worth taking seriously. Yoon Hyejin found him there, her medical kit still slung over her shoulder after treating minor injuries from the landing. "Nervous about tomorrow?" she asked, sitting on a fallen log. "Trying to figure out how to beat an enemy that can read each other's minds," Lee admitted. "Maybe we don't need to beat them at their own game," Hyejin suggested. "Humans survived on Earth because we could adapt to anything. Maybe that's our advantage." Before Lee could answer, the night sky lit up with a flare, the signal for all cadets to return to base. Commander Kim stood in the command tent, her face illuminated by holographic displays showing the entire moon's surface. Red dots indicated Galaxian forces already moving into position for tomorrow's first exercise. "They're not waiting until morning," she announced as the cadets gathered. "The Galaxians have decided the first lesson is that war doesn't follow a schedule. They're coming now." Nervous glances passed between the cadets. They weren't ready. Equipment was still being calibrated. Defense positions weren't established. Kim watched their faces, then surprised them all by smiling. "Perfect," she said. "Lesson 1 for us. Humans are at their best when the plan falls apart. Grab your gear. We're about to show them something they've never seen before." As the cadets scrambled to prepare, no one noticed the small observation craft orbiting high above Nexus 7. Inside, Confederation observers from 12 species watched with interest. One of them, an ancient being with translucent skin, leaned toward his colleague. "The Galaxians expect an easy victory to put humans in their place," he said quietly. "I suspect they're about to get more education than they bargained for." Outside, under alien stars, the first joint training exercise in human Galaxian history was about to begin. Neither side yet realized it would change the balance of power throughout the galaxy forever. The morning sun cast long shadows through the forest as Cadet Lee wiped mud from his face. 3 days into the exercises, and the human cadets had yet to win a single engagement. This latest defeat had been particularly humiliating. The Galaxian forces had surrounded their position in less than 20 minutes. "That's 15 straight losses," muttered Choi Yunju, limping back to their makeshift command post. Her training suit displayed multiple hit markers where the Galaxian stun weapons had tagged her. "At this rate, we'll set some kind of record for the most defeated unit in Confederation history." Inside the command tent, Commander Kim studied the holographic replay of their latest failure. Her expression remained neutral, but the tightness around her eyes betrayed her frustration. The 3-dimensional image showed blue dots representing human cadets being systematically outmaneuvered by red Galaxian formations that moved with uncanny precision. "They anticipate everything," said Hwang Ji-soo, the squad's communications specialist. She pushed her dirt-streaked hair from her forehead. "Standard flanking maneuvers, defensive formations, even our retreat paths. It's like they're reading our playbook before we even open it." Lee had been unusually quiet, standing at the edge of the hologram with his arms crossed. For the past hour, he'd been watching the Galaxian movements with intense focus, rewinding certain sequences repeatedly. "They're too perfect," he finally said. Song Jin-young, who'd been repairing a damaged communications unit, laughed bitterly. "Yeah, that's why we're getting our butts kicked." "No," Lee insisted, stepping forward and pointing to the formation patterns. "Look at how they move. There's no improvisation, no chaos, no individual decision-making. Even their responses to our unexpected moves follow optimization algorithms." The other cadets gathered around as Lee manipulated the hologram, highlighting Galaxian movement patterns. "See here? When Yoon's team tried that unorthodox retreat across the ravine, the Galaxians didn't immediately pursue. There was a 3-second delay while their battle meld calculated the most efficient response." Commander Kim leaned forward, her interest piqued. "What are you suggesting, Cadet?" "Their perfection is a weakness," Lee replied, his eyes bright with realization. "They've never needed to adapt quickly because they've always been the dominant force. What if we stop trying to beat them at their own game? What if we introduce so much chaos that their battle meld becomes a liability instead of an advantage?" Across the battlefield in the Galaxian Command Center, Warlord Tay was reviewing the day's victories with growing irritation. Despite their unbroken success, something felt wrong. "They're learning too quickly," he told battle leader Kang, mandibles, clicking with agitation. Their last defensive formation was unorthodox, but surprisingly effective at minimizing casualties. "They still lost," Kang reminded him, his compound eyes reflecting the tactical displays that surrounded them. "But not as badly as they should have," Tay replied, pacing the command center. His exoskeleton made soft clicking sounds against the metal floor. The battle meld analysis shows they're adapting their tactics after each engagement. At this rate, they might actually pose a challenge by the end of the exercise. "Would that be so terrible?" Kang asked carefully. "The purpose of these exercises is mutual learning." Tay turned sharply. "The purpose is to demonstrate our superiority. Tomorrow, we deploy the mountain units with full battle meld integration. I want those human cadets to understand the gulf between our capabilities." Meanwhile, back at the human camp, night had fallen. Around a small heating unit, Commander Kim had gathered all 80 cadets. The normal military hierarchy had been temporarily set aside as everyone contributed ideas. "Standard military doctrine isn't working," Kim acknowledged. "So we're going to try something different. Starting now, we're dividing into 12 autonomous squads. Each squad will operate independently, with minimal coordination." Murmurs of confusion spread through the group. "But Commander," protested one cadet, "won't that make us even easier to defeat if we're not coordinating?" Kim smiled. "That depends on what the Galaxians are expecting. They anticipate we'll try to match their coordination. Instead, we'll become too fragmented for their battle meld to predict." She turned to Yoon. "Cadet Yoon, your background in geosciences might be useful. What can you tell us about the mountain terrain we'll be fighting in tomorrow?" Yoon stepped forward. "The mountains on Nexus 7 have unusual crystalline formations. According to my readings, they create natural electromagnetic disruption fields. I think they might interfere with the Galaxians' telepathic communication." "Perfect," Kim said. "Your squad will focus on mapping those disruptions and leading Galaxian units into those areas." She turned to Cadet Song. "Your engineering skills might be our secret weapon. What can you tell us about the frequencies the Galaxians use for their battle meld?" Song scratched his head. "Based on what we've observed, they use a neural frequency similar to our own brainwaves, but amplified through their exoskeletons. If we could generate a counter frequency, make it happen," Kim ordered. "Use whatever equipment you need." By midnight, the human camp had transformed. Gone was the organized military formation. Instead, small groups huddled around different projects. Some were modifying their training suits to blend better with the mountain terrain. Others were constructing crude sonic devices designed to disrupt Galaxian sensory input. Lee found himself working with a team focused on movement patterns. They studied ancient Earth military tactics that had long ago been abandoned in favor of modern approaches. "The Galaxians have never encountered guerrilla warfare," he explained to his team. "Their entire military evolution has been based on set-piece battles between organized forces. So we'll fight like our ancestors did against superior enemies. Hit and run, never engage directly. Use the terrain as a weapon." Dawn broke over the mountains with a pale pink light. The Galaxian Mountain Division moved into position with textbook precision. Their exoskeletons adjusted to blend with the rocky terrain. Through the battle meld, each soldier knew exactly where to go and what to do. Battle leader Kang supervised from their mobile command center, his compound eyes monitoring 20 different feeds simultaneously. "The humans are scattered," he reported, to Warlord Tay with confusion in his voice. "Their formation makes no tactical sense. They appear to have abandoned coordinated defense entirely." Warlord Tay clicked his mandibles in derision. "They've given up on conventional tactics." "Good. Their surrender will come more quickly." But as the Galaxian forces advanced into the mountains, something strange happened. There were no human defenders at any of the tactical choke points. The battle meld detected human life signs all throughout the range, but there was no cohesive military presence to engage. Then it began. A small team of humans would appear from nowhere, engage briefly, and disappear again before the Galaxians could properly respond. They never stood their ground, never formed recognizable patterns, and seemed to communicate through methods the battle meld couldn't intercept. By midday, the perfect Galaxian formation was fragmented across the mountains, chasing ghosts. In the command center, Warlord Tay watched in growing disbelief as his forces reported confusion and disruption. "What is happening?" he demanded. "How are untrained cadets eluding the battle meld?" For the first time in the exercise, battle leader Kang allowed himself a moment of admiration for their opponents. "They're not trying to defeat us," he realized. "They're making us defeat ourselves." The sun climbed higher over the rugged peaks of Nexus 7, baking the exposed rock faces until they shimmered with heat. In a narrow ravine hidden from aerial surveillance, Cadet Yoon Hyejin pressed her back against the cool stone wall and checked her handheld scanner. The device, modified with parts from 3 different pieces of equipment, displayed a rough map of electromagnetic disturbances throughout the mountain range. "There," she whispered to the 5 cadets crouched beside her. "The crystal formations create a dead zone about 200 meters ahead. If the Galaxian patrol follows their usual pattern, they'll pass right through it in about 6 minutes. And when they hit the dead zone, their battle meld goes dark," asked one of her teammates. Wiping sweat from his brow, Yoon nodded. "For about 30 seconds. It's not long, but it's enough to confuse them. They've never operated without their hive mind before." On the other side of the mountain, Lee Minho and his team had set up a different kind of trap. They'd discovered that the Galaxians' sensitive hearing could be overloaded by certain frequencies bouncing off the canyon walls. Using parts scavenged from their communication equipment, they'd built crude sonic emitters. "Remember," Lee told his team as they positioned the devices, "we're not trying to win direct confrontations. We just need to keep them off balance long. Enough for Song's team to finish the main project." Meanwhile, in a cave that had been converted into a makeshift workshop, Cadet Song Jin-young hunched over a tangle of wires and circuit boards. 3 days without proper sleep had left dark circles under his eyes, but his hands remained steady as he made minute adjustments to what looked like a patchwork radio transmitter. "Is it working yet?" asked Hwang Jisoo, who'd been assigned to help with the engineering. Song made one final connection and stepped back. "Theory says it should. The Galaxian battle meld operates on a specific frequency range. This device should create enough interference to disrupt their communication, not completely, but enough to introduce errors." "Like static on an old radio?" Jisoo asked. "More like whispering the wrong answers during a test," Song replied with a tired smile. "The battle meld will still work, but the information flowing through it will be corrupted." In the Galaxian command center, the atmosphere had shifted from confident control to tense frustration. Holographic displays showed scattered reports from units across the mountain range, many reporting brief communication blackouts and disorienting sonic attacks. Warlord Tay paced furiously, his clawed feet scraping against the metal floor. "How is this possible? They're using primitive tactics from pre-spaceflight warfare." Battle leader Kang studied the tactical display with growing concern. "The humans are exploiting environmental factors we overlooked. These crystal formations have properties that interfere with our neural network, and they've mapped the interference patterns faster than our own geological team. They're savages using sticks and stones against a modern army," Tay snapped, mandibles clicking rapidly in agitation. "Savages who have managed to neutralize our greatest advantage," Kang pointed out carefully. "The battle meld is experiencing disruptions across all sectors. Our units are having to operate independently for the first time in generations." Warlord Tay stood silent for a long moment, his compound eyes reflecting the chaotic tactical display. Then, with a decisive motion, he accessed the command controls. "Enough of this humiliation," he declared. "Transmit new orders to all units. Activate actual weapons systems. Low power, but enough to sting. Let's see how brave these cadets are when facing real consequences." Battle leader Kang's posture stiffened in alarm. "Warlord, the Confederation. Protocols explicitly forbid the use of actual weapons during training exercises. We would be violating—" "I am aware of the protocols," Tay interrupted sharply. "This is a calculated demonstration. The humans need to learn respect. The settings will be minimal, enough to cause pain but not serious injury." Kang hesitated, then made the gesture of compliance. "As you command, Warlord." The order rippled through the battle meld, reaching every Galaxian soldier still connected to the network. Throughout the mountains, training weapons hummed as they switched from harmless simulation mode to low-powered but very real energy pulses. Cadet. Yoon was observing a Galaxian patrol stumble through an electromagnetic dead zone when she noticed something change. The lead soldier raised his weapon and fired at what he thought was a human shadow. Instead of the harmless light flash of a training weapon, a blue energy bolt scorched the rock wall, leaving a smoking crater. Yoon ducked back behind her cover, heart pounding. "That was a real weapon discharge," she whispered into her communicator. "Repeat, the Galaxians have activated real weapons." Across the battlefield, human cadets began reporting similar observations. Commander Kim, monitoring from their mobile command post, quickly assessed the situation. "This is no longer an exercise," she informed her officers, her voice calm despite the dangerous turn of events. "The Galaxians have escalated to live fire. Transmit to all teams. Maintain evasive protocols, but do not, I repeat, do not escalate in return." Our training weapons remain in simulation mode. "They're using real weapons against cadets with training gear," one of her officers asked incredulously. "That violates every Confederation protocol." "Which means they're desperate," Kim replied. "Continue the operation as planned, but prioritize safety. No heroics." When Lee received the update, he immediately pulled his team back from their exposed positions. "Change of plans," he told them, as they regrouped in a sheltered ravine. "We need to focus on disruption from maximum distance, no close engagements." One of his cadets, a usually quiet young man from the lunar colonies, looked genuinely afraid. "They're actually trying to hurt us now with real weapons." Lee placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "They're trying to scare us into conventional warfare where they have the advantage. We won't give them what they want." In the cave workshop, Song and Jisoo worked with renewed urgency on their disruption device. "If they're using real weapons, we need this operational now," Song said, making final adjustments to the crude transmitter. "How's the power supply?" Jisoo connected the last of their portable batteries. "It'll give us maybe 30 minutes at full power. Is that enough?" "It'll have to be," Song replied. He activated the device, which began emitting an invisible field of electromagnetic interference precisely tuned to the frequencies used by Galaxian neural enhancers. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then their communicators crackled with reports from across the battlefield. Galaxian soldiers stopping mid-stride, confused, others firing at imaginary targets, some units turning to engage in the wrong direction entirely. In the Galaxian command center, alarms blared as the battle meld experienced unprecedented disruption. Warlord Tay watched in horror as the tactical display devolved into chaos. "What's happening?" he demanded, his normally commanding voice rising with something close to panic. Battle leader Kang worked frantically at the control panel. "Some kind of interference. It's affecting the battle meld at the synaptic level. The network is still functioning, but..." He paused, watching the readings with disbelief. "Information is being corrupted as it passes from soldier to soldier. Commands are being misinterpreted. Sensory data is being mixed between units." "Shut it down," Tay ordered. "Disconnect the battle meld and have all units operate on standard protocols." "That's the problem," Kang replied grimly. "They don't know how. Our soldiers haven't operated without the battle meld in centuries. They've become dependent on it. And now, with corrupted information flowing through their neural links, they're experiencing something like hallucinations." Outside, the situation for the Galaxian forces was deteriorating rapidly. Soldiers who had never known individual combat found themselves isolated, their trusted neural network now feeding them contradictory information. Some fired at shadows, others reported enemies that weren't there. Units began to retreat from phantom threats or advance against non-existent targets. And through it all, the human cadets maintained their disciplined but unconventional approach, appearing just long enough to create confusion before vanishing again into the landscape they had learned to use as a weapon. The perfect Galaxian war machine, feared throughout. The galaxy, for its coordination and precision, was unraveling, not from superior firepower or technology, but from the creative adaptation of teenagers, armed with nothing but training equipment and desperate ingenuity. The setting sun painted the mountains of Nexus 7 in shades of crimson and gold, casting long shadows that stretched across the valleys, like dark fingers. In one such shadow, Cadet Yoon crouched behind a boulder, her heart hammering in her chest. Seconds earlier, a Galaxian energy pulse had scorched the rock just inches from her head, leaving a smoking crater where her face had been moments before. "They're definitely not playing around anymore," she whispered into her communicator, trying to keep her voice steady. "That shot would have put me in the medical bay for a week." Commander Kim's voice came back clear but grim. "All teams, maintain. Current protocols. We now have confirmation that the Galaxians have activated actual weapons. This is no longer a training exercise, but we will not escalate. I repeat, maintain training weapon settings." Yoon peeked around the edge of the boulder. Through her field glasses, she could see a squad of Galaxian soldiers moving erratically through the valley below. Their normally precise movements were disjointed, almost confused. One soldier kept swatting at the air as if fighting invisible enemies. "Something's wrong with them," she reported. "They're acting bizarre." Back at the human command post, Commander Kim studied the holographic battlefield display with intense focus. The red dots representing Galaxian forces were moving in increasingly chaotic patterns, nothing like their usual disciplined formations. "Song's device is working better than we expected," she noted. "The electromagnetic interference is corrupting their battle meld. They're experiencing sensory confusion across all units." Lee, who had just returned from the field, studied the display. His uniform was torn and dirty, but his eyes were bright with adrenaline. "It's more than confusion," he said. "They don't know how to function without perfect information. Their entire combat doctrine is built around the battle meld. Without it, they're like soldiers who've suddenly gone blind." On the other side of the mountains, Warlord Tay stood in his command center, rage emanating from every inch of his towering, insectoid frame. The tactical displays showed his once perfect legion in disarray, units reporting contradictory information or not reporting at all. "How can cadets with training equipment do this?" he demanded, slamming a clawed hand onto the control panel. "They have no technology, no experience, nothing." Battle leader Kang worked frantically at his station, trying to stabilize the battle meld network. "They're using our strength against us," he replied, not looking up from his work. "The interference is precisely targeted at our neural frequency. It's not blocking communication, it's corrupting it. Each soldier thinks they're receiving valid commands, but the information is scrambled. Can you clear the interference?" Kang's compound eyes reflected the flickering displays before him. "Not quickly. The source is mobile and changing frequency. Whoever designed this understands our systems better than they should." In a makeshift laboratory hidden deep in a narrow canyon, Song and Huang were constantly modifying their interference device, staying one step ahead of the Galaxians' attempts to filter out the disruption. "They're trying to adapt," Song noted, watching the readings on his cobbled-together monitor. Changing their communication frequencies, Huang adjusted a dial on their transmitter. "Then we change with them. They may have better technology, but they're thinking like engineers. We're thinking like hackers." As night fell completely, the human cadets executed the next phase of their plan. Having mapped the mountain terrain in detail, they knew which paths the Galaxians would likely take to regroup. Under cover of darkness, teams set up simple but effective traps, not to injure but to further disorient. Lee led one such team, setting up reflective surfaces at specific angles along a narrow pass. "When they use their searchlights, these will create multiple phantom images," he explained to his team. "Their visual sensors won't be able to distinguish real targets from reflections." Another team, led by Choi Eunju, placed sonic emitters tuned to frequencies that would disrupt the Galaxians' sensitive hearing. "It'll sound like whispers just below the threshold of comprehension," she told her cadets. Psychological warfare. 101. By midnight, the Galaxian forces were in unprecedented disarray. 3 battalions had become trapped in a box canyon, unable to coordinate their exit. Others wandered in circles, their navigation systems corrupted by the continuing electromagnetic interference. Some had simply shut down, their soldiers overwhelmed by contradictory sensory input. In the command center, Warlord Tay made a desperate decision. "Bring all remaining functional units to Sector 7, he ordered. "We'll establish a defensive perimeter and rebuild the battle meld from scratch." Kang looked up from his station, mandibles twitching with concern. "Sector 7? That's directly through the heart of the crystal formations. Our scouts reported the heaviest electromagnetic disturbances there." "It's also the most defensible position," Tay countered. "Once we consolidate our forces, we can re-establish control." As the order went out through conventional communications, the battle meld now too corrupted to trust, Commander Kim intercepted the transmission. A slow smile spread across her face. "They're making a crucial mistake," she told her officers. "They're moving into the exact terrain where our advantage is greatest." She turned to Lee. "Gather your fastest teams. I want you to reach Sector 7 before the Galaxians do. Set up everything we have. Sonic disruptors, reflectors, the works. Create a nightmare scenario." Lee nodded and rushed out, gathering cadets as he went. Within 20 minutes, 8 small teams were racing through the moonlit mountains, taking shortcuts no Galaxian would consider, scaling sheer cliffs, wading through ice-cold streams, squeezing through narrow crevices that their bulkier enemies couldn't navigate. They reached Sector 7 with barely 30 minutes to spare. Working with frantic efficiency, they transformed the natural bowl-shaped valley into an elaborate trap. Zong's improved interference transmitter was positioned at the heart of the formation, its signal amplified by the natural properties of the surrounding crystal formations. As dawn broke, the first Galaxian units entered the valley from the east. Their once gleaming exoskeletons were now dirty and damaged. Their movements, once a perfect synchronized dance, were hesitant and disjointed. They communicated with hand signals and light flashes, their precious battle meld now more liability than asset. From his hidden position, Lee watched through field glasses as more Galaxian forces arrived from different directions. "They're all here," he whispered into his communicator. "Almost their entire remaining force, just as predicted." Commander Kim's voice came back calm and clear. "Execute Phase 3. At that signal, Song activated the enhanced interference transmitter at maximum power. Simultaneously, every sonic emitter and reflective surface came online, creating a cacophony of misleading sensory input. The effect on the Galaxian forces was immediate and dramatic. Soldiers who had been struggling to maintain formation now lost all cohesion. Some dropped to the ground, overwhelmed by conflicting inputs to their neural systems. Others fired wildly at phantom targets. Units that had arrived from different directions began to engage each other, unable to distinguish friend from foe. From his command ship hovering above the battlefield, Warlord Tay watched in horror as his legion disintegrated into chaos. The tactical display showed his forces firing on each other, retreating from non-existent threats, and generally behaving like an army that had lost its mind. "This isn't possible," he whispered, his proud voice now hollow with disbelief. "They're children with toys against the most elite fighting force in the Confederation." Beside him, battle leader Kang observed the disaster with a complex mixture of emotions. Part of him felt the same shame and disbelief as his commander. But another part, the part that had studied human history, felt something else, a grudging admiration. "They didn't try to match our strength," he said quietly. "They found our weakness instead. No one has ever done that before." Below, the human. Cadets emerged from their hiding places, surrounding the disoriented Galaxian forces. Armed only with training weapons against real energy weapons, they nevertheless held the tactical advantage. The hunters had become the hunted. The teachers had become the students. And the galaxy's most feared fighting force found itself at the mercy of teenagers who had simply refused to play by the established rules. The tables had turned completely, not through superior firepower or technology, but through the uniquely human gifts of adaptation, creativity, and the willingness to try the unconventional when conventional methods failed. The Confederation observation vessel dropped out of hyperspace, above Nexus 7, its sleek silver hull catching the morning sunlight. Inside, Supreme Observer Han Junho frowned at the emergency alerts flooding his command console. The automated systems had detected unauthorized weapons discharge during what was supposed to be a routine training exercise. "Prepare my shuttle," he instructed his aide, "and contact both command centers. I want to know exactly what's happening down there before I arrive." As his shuttle descended through the atmosphere, Han reviewed the preliminary reports with growing astonishment. According to the sensor logs, the Galaxian Legion, the most decorated fighting force in the Confederation, was in disarray, surrounded by human cadets who were still using only training equipment despite being fired upon with actual energy weapons. "This can't be right," he muttered, adjusting his formal diplomatic robes. Han had been mediating interspecies conflicts for over 40 years, but he'd never encountered a situation quite like this. The shuttle touched down on a flat area near the Sector 7 valley, where a temporary truce had been established. As Han stepped onto the rocky ground, he was met by Commander Kim, her uniform torn and dirty, but her posture impeccably straight. "Supreme Observer," she greeted him with a respectful bow. "Welcome to what was supposed to be a training exercise," Han looked past her to the valley below, where hundreds of Galaxian soldiers sat or stood in clearly disoriented states. Human cadets maintained a loose perimeter around them, still holding only their training weapons. Would someone explain how cadets with simulation weapons have managed to neutralize the most decorated legion in the Confederation? Han asked, genuine confusion in his voice. Commander Kim gestured to the mountains around them. "A training exercise. Supreme Observer. Perhaps more educational than originally intended." She called over several cadets, including Li, Yun, and Song, who explained their improvised tactics, the exploitation of electromagnetic disruptions, the sonic interference, the psychological warfare, and most importantly, the disruption of the Galaxian battle meld. Han listened with growing amazement. "You developed all this in less than a week, using only training equipment and the natural environment?" Song nodded, holding up their makeshift interference device. "We had to adapt, sir. When the Galaxians activated real weapons, we couldn't match their firepower, so we targeted their coordination instead." "Activated real weapons?" Han's expression darkened. "That is a serious violation of Confederation protocols." A shuttle bearing Galaxian markings descended nearby. Warlord Tay emerged, his normally imposing presence diminished by the circumstances. His exoskeleton was damaged, with scorch marks visible on one side. Behind him came battle leader Kang, who carried himself with dignity despite their defeat. "Warlord Tay," Han greeted him coldly. "I've received reports of protocol violations. Explain yourself." Tay's mandibles clicked in agitation. These humans employed dishonorable tactics. They refused to engage in proper combat formations. They hid like vermin and struck without warning. They adapted," interrupted battle leader Kang. "And we did not." He turned to Han. "The reports are accurate, Supreme Observer. I regret to confirm that Warlord Tay ordered the activation of actual weapons against cadets equipped only with training devices." Murmurs spread through the gathered humans and Galaxians alike. Such an admission from a high-ranking Galaxian was unprecedented. Warlord Tay's compound eyes flashed with anger. "You dare contradict me, battle leader?" "I dare speak the truth," Kang replied evenly. "Our defeat was not due to human deception, but to our own rigidity. We expected them to fight as we do, and, when they did not, we responded with escalation rather than adaptation." Han's expression was grave. "This is a serious matter that the Confederation Council will address. For now, the exercise is terminated." He turned to Commander Kim. "Your cadets have shown remarkable restraint in not escalating despite provocation. The Council will be informed of this." Warlord Tay stood rigid, surrounded by his demoralized soldiers and facing a decision between further humiliation or the ultimate disgrace. Around him, his officers were already questioning his judgment through what remained of their battle meld. "The exercise is concluded," Tay finally stated, his voice carrying across the mountain valley. "I formally acknowledge the effectiveness of human tactics." The words clearly cost him great effort, each syllable forced out against his pride. 3. Hours later, after Confederation investigators had confirmed the unauthorized weapons activation and examined the ingenious countermeasures employed by the human cadets, the formal surrender ceremony took place. By Confederation law, any training exercise that escalated to actual weapons use automatically became a recorded engagement, with the results entered into official military records. In the shadow of the observation vessel, Warlord Tay stood before Commander Kim. With ritual precision, he deactivated his command insignia and presented it to her, the traditional symbol of battlefield surrender. "The Galaxian Legion acknowledges defeat," he intoned, the formal words bitter on his tongue. "Honor is satisfied." Commander Kim accepted the insignia with appropriate gravity, then immediately returned it, a gesture of respect that surprised the watching Galaxians. "The exercise is concluded," she replied, "but the learning continues." As the human and Galaxian forces prepared to leave Nexus 7th, Cadet Lee found himself approached by battle leader Kang. The Galaxian officer towered over him, but his posture was one of respect rather than intimidation. "Your species fights like no other we have encountered," Kang said, mandibles moving in what Lee now recognized as a gesture of respect. "You had no technological advantage, no numerical superiority, no battle experience, yet you adapted in ways our centuries of warfare never prepared us for." "Humans have been fighting each other longer than we've had space travel," Lee replied with a small smile. "Sometimes the oldest lessons are the most valuable." Kang extended a clawed hand in the human gesture of greeting he had studied. "The next time we meet in battle, simulated or otherwise, do not expect us to be so predictable. We too can learn." Lee shook the offered hand carefully. "I'm counting on it." 6 weeks later, in the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council, representatives from 200 species gathered to review the incident on Nexus 7. The unexpected outcome of what should have been a routine training exercise had sent shockwaves through the military hierarchy of the Confederation. Admiral Park stood beside Commander Kim as the final report was presented to the assembled delegates. The holographic display showed key moments from the exercise, focusing on the innovative tactics employed by the human cadets. "In light of these events," announced the Council President, "this body has voted unanimously to establish the first Human Tactical Advisory Committee, with Commander Kim appointed as its chair." Murmurs spread through the chamber, some approving, others concerned. The elevation of such a young species to a position of military influence was unprecedented. "Furthermore," continued the President, "all Confederation military academies will now include a mandatory course on adaptive tactics, with guest instructors from Earth Space Academy." In the gallery above the main floor, the cadets who had participated in the Nexus 7 exercise watched with quiet pride. They had arrived as students expected to learn their place, but had instead become teachers to the galaxy's oldest military powers. As they filed out of the chamber afterward, Lee found himself walking beside Yoon and Song. "So," he asked with a grin, "ready to teach the galaxy's most advanced species how to fight like primitive humans?" Song laughed. "I'm still trying to process that improvise and break the rules is now going to be an official Confederation military doctrine." Yoon's expression was more thoughtful. "I don't think that's what they learned from us. It wasn't about breaking rules. It was about recognizing when the rules no longer apply." Throughout the vast expanse of the Confederation, military doctrines began to change. The species that had been dismissed as newcomers had demonstrated that sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one with nothing to lose and everything to prove. The incident on Nexus 7 became a case study in every military academy, from the core worlds to the outer reaches. But perhaps the most profound change occurred on the Galaxian homeworld, where battle leader Kang, now promoted to replace the disgraced Warlord Tay, instituted a revolutionary new training program. For the first time in centuries, Galaxian soldiers were taught to fight without the battle meld, to make individual decisions, and to value unpredictability alongside precision. Remember, Nexus 7 became his watchword to new recruits. The enemy who adapts fastest is the one who prevails. And on Earth, a new generation of cadets listened in awe as their instructors recounted how 80 teenagers with training weapons had defeated the galaxy's most feared fighting force, not through superior technology or firepower, but through the uniquely human gifts of creativity, adaptation, and the courage to try the impossible when the possible has failed.